In today's episode, you'll be seeing two familiar faces and one new one. This is the first of our our three-part series on career Q&As for undergraduates, graduate students, and doctoral students. After Richard and my first Q&A back in December, the ASA asked us to continue the series and try to cover more of these early career Q&As for students who would like some advice. This is our undergraduate one, and our guest today is Mallory. And I just want to say one of the things that I really appreciated about Mallory's contribution to this conversation was that she was actively contributing to the chat, and especially that she was giving us this very useful boots on the ground perspective of what undergraduate education is like and some of the challenges in it for people who are wanting to become a data scientist. One final note I'll also make for current undergrads who are watching this is that while I believe that the advice that Richard and I gave to Mallory is very applicable both to Mallory and probably yourselves as well, it's also important to keep in mind that Richard and I are about 10 years farther in our careers than Mallory is. And the reason that I bring that up is I think that in addition to listening to whatever advice we give, it's very important for you to go and find someone who's a little bit still farther ahead, but a little bit closer. I'm a very big believer in the idea that you should find good mentors and good advice from people who are in 3 to 5 years ahead of you in your careers. And the reason for that is that they're far enough ahead that they can provide a good advice on trajectory, but at the same time, they're not so far past the time where you are at that they might forget some of the important things. Also, a lot has changed in the time since we were in Mallory's shoes. So I think that's worth noting that I think we gave good advice, but you should take it with a grain of salt and definitely keep looking for other good pieces of advice out there. So if you're an undergraduate, maybe find someone who is 2, 3, 4, 5 years out of undergraduate and out of their degree and can give you further advice. That's it, and enjoy the conversation.
Guess who's back? Back again. Richard's back. And we've called Mallory. So following up on the highly successful first career Q&A from earlier, we're doing it again. We got a whole bunch of questions from a variety of people, undergrads, grad students, people who already have jobs. And just to try to get everyone's questions answered, we divided the work in the following way. Richard and I are going to host 3 Q&A sessions, one for specifically with an undergrad, one with a master's student, and one with a doctoral student. Our undergrad representative is here. And then we also have some specific questions that people have been sending in. For example, people talking about biofarms, the environment, very specific job questions for data science. And what I'm doing for that is I'm compiling a group of experts in those various fields so we can give you very specific answers. But today we have Mallory as the undergraduate representative asking career Q&A questions for undergrads who are interested in data science. So Mallory, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll get started.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Mallory LaRusso, and I'm currently a senior at North Carolina State University, getting a bachelor in statistics and my minor in genetics. And I'm really excited to ask you all a few questions I have. So thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. You've actually already, I know that you're going to be asking general advice about undergrads and also some specific questions. But I would just like to say from the get-go, Mallory has made a really great impression. Super easy to work with. She's obviously a person, I've talked to her right before this, and she's a person who keeps busy. She's working some different jobs while an undergrad, doing some undergraduate research. As you just heard, she also is getting a minor in genetics, which is very helpful that you have a nice, an additional hard topic in addition to studying how to analyze data. So I think, Mallory, you're probably already answering some of the questions about what people should be doing right before you even came on here.
Yeah, a big thing we do push at NC State is trying to pair a statistics major with a different science minor. we have built-in electives that can easily be counted as a minor. So a lot of people at State do take these science electives and kind of add them up to a minor. So it's kind of like built into my degree. So I strongly recommend, if you are considering statistics, try to find something else you're interested in, because you can apply statistics to almost anything. So if there's something you're really interested in, you can study that a lot and get a minor and pair them two together. So yeah, I would recommend that.
Yeah. And also, just on that note, one of the other reasons is it's not just so that you have a place to apply your statistics, but, scientific disciplines differ in sort of the priorities that they place on, or like where you need to rigorously evaluate different phenomena, the assumptions that you make, the experimental process that goes into observing whatever scientific phenomena you're dealing with. And I think that one of the really nice advantages of actually studying a specific science is that it does complement you in your scientific thinking. You get to see different things, how people think. Richard, you're a physicist. Is that correct?
I agree. I think that with statistics is a really good place to start, because when it is applied, there are nuances, and certainly, a physicist and an engineer would think differently about similar problems, and there's a lot to be said for having a couple of perspectives to begin with, which if you speak to, genetics and
yeah, and also just like, these aren't some of these perspectives aren't things that you can just come to a priori just by being a super smart person. You have to actually have experience working in those different scientific fields to get those perspectives. But Mallory, you have a number of questions for us. Maybe we should just get on to the questions. Yeah,
of course. So my first question, I know you all have touched on this a little bit, but if you could just summarize it for the people watching today. What was your educational and career path like? How did you get to where you are today?
Cool. Yeah, I'll take that first. So I did a math and economics undergrad degree, so double major, and a lot of my math degrees were focused on classes. Besides the pure math background, it was also statistics and operations research, so mathematical optimization. After that, I got a master's degree in operations research and with a minor in statistics. And then I went on to Oxford to get a master in statistics and then a doctorate in probabilistic machine learning. So statistical models and the automation of statistical models for time series analysis and optimization.
Okay, so briefly, so I was at Oxford and studied physics to masters, and then I continued into engineering science at Oxford doing biomedical engineering. Along the way, I skipped around some biochemistry, some material science, and after the engineering, I actually became a teacher for a couple of years. I did high school maths teaching, and now I find myself in the pharmaceutical industry doing mathematical modeling and simulation there. So, going back to my physics, I did some biological physics, which has been quite transferable to a lot of the problems I solve right now.
That's awesome. Thank you both. Very impressive.
I will say this, I would not have planned this point or current place 15 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, yeah? What were your original plans?
Oh, I can't really have any study things I was interested in. I think was the foundation.
Yeah.
I think we'll talk about this later, I think, but
yeah, maybe a good way to summarize it might be that both Richard and I, there's probably a much faster trajectory to where we ended up, where we were a bit more circuitous than if we had particular foresight. Cool. All right. So what next question?
Mm-hmm. What is a typical day like for you at work, and how would you describe the culture at the workplace?
Cool. Richard, do you want to go first, or should I?
I can take that. So I'd tell you a day. So I look at it more as a week, because each day in a week would be quite different. But it might be that I wake up and I have a list of things to do, and one of those things is the entire day writing some code for some simulations, or or specifically working on developing a particular model, and that might be the entire day. It might be half the day, but usually it's that sort of thing is quite a contiguous period of time. But then there are some days where I wake up and I've got several emails I need to just send out on a variety of projects, and that takes a while because sometimes there's responses. So that could be the entire day as well. And then it could also be a project that somebody's working on, and I'm helping them as they ask questions. So they're off doing their work, and I'm sending some emails, and then somebody goes, "Oh, have you got a minute?" Or if you got half an hour or so. So there might be some ad hoc meetings during a day when I wouldn't normally have interruptions. And then there are some days where it's just meeting after meeting for 4 or 5 hours, usually following on from a day of doing a lot of modeling and simulation to present. So each day is very different. And each day is, the beginning of the day, you have a plan, and halfway through it's been derailed. So there's a lot of variability throughout a day, or reactivity, shall we say, to situations.
Great.
Yeah, very varied. Not like studying. I'll say that.
Yeah. Well, it keeps it interesting. So that's a good thing.
True.
Yeah, so I'll sort of back up some of the bits that Richard said, although I guess I feel a little bit more like a cave troll where maybe there's a lot less variability in my day. So basically, Richard interacts with a lot more people than I do on a day-to-day basis. In fact, I very specifically interact with about 2 people on a day-to-day basis, and the rest is a little bit more periodic. And I think one thing that Richard highlighted was that it's not like, for example, taking classes where you'll take 2, 3, 4 classes in a given day. For me, it's essentially on any given day, I'm essentially working on one thing. And in my case, really the way I try to organize is I'll spend maybe multiple days, including up to a week, working on a particular thing. For example, data organization or data munging, which isn't the most fun thing, but it's one of those things where like you just need to bury yourself in and just get it done. And so effectively on a multi-day scale, or maybe even a 1 week scale, it might be more or less dedicated entirely to data organization. And then when I get to the end of that, then what I have is like the next week, well, I can do a lot of data analysis and things like that. So effectively the different sort of data science tasks, which I know like if you take a Coursera course, it feels like, oh yeah, you clean the data in a few functions and you do some analysis, then you iterate on the model and things like that. For me, it's much more segmented where it's a lot of prep work, then we do analysis, then we do tuning, then like figuring out how to deploy it, and then more prep work and things like that. So for me, it's very segmented. And so on a week to week basis, the variability is more on between 1 week and the next. And then I basically do some minor stuff away from computers just to give my eyes a break. Some of the more mathematical work when that comes up.
I think it's worth mentioning, so I work in consulting, so that's usually juggling several projects that kind of spike up with a lot of work to do and then they go quiet, or there's always a low level of just interaction to be had. And it does depend a bit on a project. So in 6 months' time, there may be 2 or 3 weeks where every day is analysis. Mm-hmm. It's probably not going to happen as often as it used to happen, but it certainly means that it can be very similar to what Glenn describes. So just to kind of add to what he talks about with traditionally what you would think of when you do data, programming data, cleaning it and analyzing, that still happens, but usually on shorter time scales.
Mm.
Yeah, I know, for example, I've gotten really excited when I know that like I have like a few days of actual machine learning ahead of me. That's pretty exciting. And just for some more context, whereas Richard works in more of a consulting and life science role, I'm a data scientist within a software company. So effectively, I'm surrounded by software engineers, and that does change the expectations. Richard is outward facing. I'm entirely inward facing with very few exceptions. Cool.
You know, it's funny. So just one more thing that because you were saying, I look forward to these things and those things. I was just thinking that, some days, and I look forward to this, is I get to literally sit there, print out some papers or some reports and just read and understand a problem. So, if a project's at the early stages where there's planning going on, it may be 2 days of just learning about a program and what they want to do. So no analysis per se, but certainly a lot of learning and understanding of a problem before planning and delving in. So.
Yeah. No, I'll second that. There are periods where effectively you'll just say, okay, I don't know how to do X. I need to learn how to do X, or I need better ideas of how to do this task. Because, obviously you're only one person and there's a huge body of human knowledge out there. And you just say, look, I'm going to take, these top 5 articles, and I'm just going to chunk through them, take notes, and hopefully something comes up that will make me more efficient. And, you can't be afraid to do those things, because a few days of reading what somebody else does, your time scales of messing other things up. For example, choosing an incorrect model, or just going off on choosing the wrong priorities for your data science project. You can lose a lot of time on those. So learning from other people in advance, getting that boiled down version, the highlights of other people's work, is very useful.
So I feel like the answer to the question, what's a typical day look like, is there isn't really a typical day.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of what you both were talking about, like how you really need to like plan and research what other people are doing before you dive into projects. That was like one of the biggest surprises for me. I have an internship over the summer, and it continued throughout the year. And I thought it would be a lot of just like busy work, like, clean up this data set and stuff like that. But I was really lucky to be thrown into some projects. And that was like the biggest shock for me. Like reading all these scientific papers, I thought after school I wouldn't have to read them anymore. But that's definitely not the case, which is a good thing, because then you're always learning. So I really appreciate that part of this field.
Yeah, I hope you like lots of reading. You will have lots of reading in your future. Reading's a cool technology, and that's why humans have persisted over millennia. But yeah, definitely do that. I would also suggest that whether it's necessary, whether it's required of you, and I'm not like talking to you personally, Mallory, whether it's required of you or not, you should practice writing as well. Writing is important for the very specific reason that it forces you to focus your ideas and organize them. And you will actually become a much better thinker. Like people are paying you for your ability to think on these things. And yeah, you have a computer that helps you do that. You have these, mathematical and statistical discoveries that have happened before you. But the point is, they are paying you to synthesize all that and deliver something of use. And if you practice writing in addition to reading on a regular basis, it will really sharpen your thoughts, and you will really stand out in the long run if you're someone who practices writing, because you're someone who's then practicing thinking. And that's really what people are going to be paying you to do.
I'll add one thing that extends and builds on that, really, is that I really think, and I've probably taught this before, but communication is, writing is just one form of communication, and concise writing is incredibly powerful. But generally speaking, practicing how to communicate ideas, complex or simple, is probably one of the biggest things that may or may not be a rate limiting step. I think.
Yeah.
You will rarely be speaking to another statistician. I think that's probably an assumption that's fair, especially if, you're in a company that doesn't have many, but you are a data scientist there performing that role. You don't always speak to others.
Yeah. And I guess maybe, obviously, since we're just piling bricks on each other, I would also say that, as Richard said, you aren't always going to be talking to another statistician or data scientist. You're going to be talking to someone who might actually not know very much about data analysis. And one thing I'd just say off the top is, make sure you don't take advantage of that relationship. Make sure that you're essentially respectful of the fact that you're in a position where frequently people can't actually evaluate the quality of your work and the rigor of your work. And you do need to make sure that you are respecting that and not taking advantage of that situation. Just like you'd expect a domain expert who's helping you to help lead you on the right path. So I guess that's something where there's a bit where you get to feel cool because you're the person who does all the data analysis, and there's all this social hype around this skill set at the time. But I would just say, as a priori, be cognizant that you aren't misusing that relationship in some advantageous way that isn't appropriate.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know there's a lot of like fluff statistics out there, so it's good to make sure you're telling the truth.
Yeah. Cool. So, well, what's next? I think we've basically gone through. We've talked long enough now that we've contradicted ourselves on what a typical day looks like.
I think part of the question was about culture in the workplace.
Yeah, culture.
I think there's a few things on my end which I think are probably distinct from Glenn. Is that, because I work with several companies, what happens is there's a lot of cultures of companies that you become part of when you interact with them. So it varies a great deal because of that. But on the side that I sit with my company, at least, the culture is very much a collaboration, because there's an element of being pragmatic and flexible that you need to have as a consultant working on different projects at different stages and asking for help or giving help on the short timescales, on the high intensity. So there's a lot of sort of flexibility in how to respond to situations and just support on that side that I think is really needed in a consultancy company. I think it might be a bit different in specific companies or even actually specific groups within companies. So the culture for mine is just one of, let's just help each other and solve whatever problem it is.
Right. That's awesome. Was your job before the pandemic virtual too?
Mine was. I worked from home before I had to work from home.
Got you. Okay. What about you, Glenn?
Yeah. So my working arrangement was a bit flexible for basically I just pre-negotiated a more flexible working arrangement just to better accommodate my own family life. And so I also happen to work for a really great company who does prioritize those types of things. And so, for me, it was very flexible about when I would come in, when I would go. It doesn't hurt, though, the fact that I'm a data scientist within a software engineering company. So what might be less appropriate for a software engineer to do, because they do need to be sort of in the scrum, so to say, they need to be having that more engaged relationship. I'm essentially a little bit more like just orbiting certain things. So it would be less disruptive for me to be a bit more remote. And then prior to that, I was actually at a company that was entirely, that was remote first. And that's just because for technical skills, you can't really be limiting yourself to certain geographies. That it's just easiest to say, here's this person on this side of the globe. We want them, they have internet, give them a computer and we will connect.
Right.
Yeah. Cool.
Awesome. Cool. So should I hop on to the next question now? Cool. So I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but what type of data do you normally work with every day?
Time series. It's all about time series. I have not touched non-time series data since early in the previous decade. So we're talking early 2010s since I have touched non-time series data of some sort. And in fact, even some of the non-time series data that I worked with was actually derived from time series. It was just basically boiled down and summarized. So the world is just a giant time series, at least in this universe. And so, it's a lot of time series for me, nothing but time series. And basically optimization around those time series and automated statistical inference. So basically automated model fitting. So whereas I know most people are accustomed to anyone can fit a model while you're looking at the data, the problem is getting a computer to fit it while no one's looking and then make further inference on it. So that's the type of data that I worked with. Previously, it was patient vital signs. Now it's around clinical supplies.
So I'm similar insofar as it's almost all time series data. It's and if there is anything that's not time series data, it's being derived from time series data. So very much the same as Glenn. However, specifically in what I do, I do what's called pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic modeling. So pharmacokinetic really means what the body's doing to a drug. So typically that might be drug concentrations in the body after as part of a clinical trial or preclinical data. So, or even in fact in vitro data. So all stages. So there's basically concentrations usually of things over time, or the effects of drugs, and matching those up or modeling those together in typically ODE models or statistical models as well. So there's almost two broad. There's a bifurcation, as it were, depending on a lot of the things you look at, and something might be actual statistical models in and of themselves, and others might be models that are a bit more physiological, foundational models. So, bridging.
Yeah, I'd actually just very quickly point that out, that it's something that I think a lot of people early in their statistics and data science careers struggle with, because depending on which department you're in and you're learning these topics, they'll tend to favor certain types of models, or whether it's like a heavily mathematical model versus essentially saying, we're going to essentially measure correlations and things like that. And they also differ in the terms that they use to just distinguish between these two different approaches. But there is a difference out there, probably beyond the scope of this conversation. But if you ever feel like there's some weird thing where like this model just doesn't feel like a statistical model, it might not be. And so keep that in mind. I know that's just like a vague warning, but but it is something like, for example, you look at the discussion around COVID, where you have, for example, the SIR model, which has obviously just gotten pilloried and beaten as per usual. And then you have these more like correlational models, where you're essentially looking at the features of a given county and predicting what their COVID rates might be. And those are two logically different approaches. They're tied by math, but the fact is they are going down different routes, and their assumptions, the strength of the assumptions are very different. So they do lead in different places. And you might use both, but they are different.
I guess to help sort of clarify on my answer, I think with the work I do, almost all of it at some level does have some scientific assumptions, which I feel like that's what you're getting at, Glenn, right?
Or mathematical ones, like, just when you talk about a SIR model, so the SIR model, which people have seen for basically who's at risk and who can get infected, and who's survived, that essentially it's a small number of parameters in the model, but you're just deductively moving forward, saying like, here's the transmission mechanism. I'm describing it with a small number of equations, and this is how the model will essentially progress, or here's how the disease will progress. And people have basically used that for forecasting, for example, COVID. They used it to forecast mad cow disease and some of the swine flus and things like that. And those are fundamentally different than saying, you know what, I'm just going to take a linear regression or a random forest model. The assumptions that underline those, saying I'm just going to plug and chug on the mathematical equations versus saying I'm going to try to learn these correlations, those do go down different routes. And we know that because, if anything, they produce different predictions. Again, probably a conversation. If I'd known in advance that I was going to go this far down on talking about this one topic, I would not have made that comment. But while there are undergrads, maybe just a good takeaway is that there are these disparate sort of methods that people are using. And it might not be clarified to you at the time why they're so different. But you will learn in time and you'll get better at it. So I would say if it feels a little bit weird that seems like there's these different paradigms, but no one's telling you when to choose which one, that's because it's a weird and no one knows to choose which one, and it's down to preference.
Yeah.
I really regret making that comment. So
it's a good point, because I think that, sometimes these, I think it comes down often to actually the problem you're trying to solve is a really big indicator of how to solve it, right? And I think, when it comes back to the question, what data do I use in my work? It's all clinical trial or preclinical trial data, as I said. And you just, the paradigm is, let's have an hypothesis to test that is scientific. So it does sometimes restrict, specifically in what I do, what kind of models you use. But if you go into different areas of the same field I'm in, where there is no hypothesis, I think one of the things I came across in my doctorate was protein folding, and this whole, trying to use physical models for protein folding, and turns out they were nowhere near as good as machine learning models using databases of information that have been collected. And I think just recently that's just been more and more confirmed more and more with a lot of the information. So, there's certain fields, and that's still pharmaceutical sciences down at the drug discovery level, right? It's not quite what I do, but you find that people evolve their models, even something with the same data. I have just dug an even deeper side rabbit hole to your one, Glenn.
Yeah, I think Mallory's probably thinking like, how can I remotely poison them so they stop talking about this unimportant issue? But yeah, I was going to try to distill into one sentence a pearl of wisdom, but I'm not even going to try to salvage it at that point. I keep making it worse. There are different paradigms by which people solve these problems. I do remember one thing, and then we will move on from this question. Absolutely. One thing that you might notice, and this is talking directly to undergrads who are looking at their job prospects, is that you might find that a lot of the jobs, like the job descriptions, it sounds like some of the harder data analysis tasks. So there's some more straightforward ones, and there's some harder ones. I think time series, spatial, geospatial, or spatial temporal modeling, things like that. The reason that there are a lot more jobs like that, and that those openings tend to sort of persist, is because the sort of bread and butter simple data analysis can actually usually be solved by non-data scientists and things like that. So there is an element there where there's a bit of survivorship bias in some of these job offerings, where it's the harder problems that take longer to solve that are the ones that still have job openings. So a tidbit of information there, and now we will move on.
Awesome. So the next question I have for you all is, what is your favorite project that you've worked on so far?
Patient vital sign monitoring. Done. Like, patient vital sign monitoring is probably one of the most interesting data analysis things that is out there. It's infinitely deep and infinitely broad, by which I mean there's a massive amount of data, and you can always do more sophisticated analysis, and it pays off. So one thing that I think a lot of people, like when you're early in your career, one thing you have to think about is like, okay, if I work on this project, will it pay off? Can I keep working on it? Does it have a lot of runway? And a lot of data science projects don't have runway. For example, if there's anything where someone's actually collecting the data by paper, it probably doesn't have a lot of runway because it's really difficult to get more data. But patient vital sign monitoring, the data is all digital. You can do sophisticated analysis and it does really good work. You can do simple analysis and it does really good work. You can make sure that it's applicable to a clinician. You can make sure that's applicable to someone in the pharmaceutical industry. And so essentially it's a project that just pays off infinitely, where you can keep getting better and better at it, and it always pays off. And that's why I think patient vital sign monitoring is probably one of the greatest machine learning and data science applications that's out there.
Awesome.
I haven't really got a favorite project. My answer is very different. I've been fortunate to work on a variety of different scientific problems at different levels. But one of the things I found is that my set of favorite projects is really just about two things. Do I think this is useful? And do I enjoy the people I work with? And that for me is really it. And I've got a short list of projects that are highly correlated with those two predictors. But if I couldn't speak to one
Is one of them showing up on a friend's podcast? It's useful and you enjoy the people. Am I one of those projects?
Oh, of course, Glenn. But
all right, cool.
Yeah, but I mean, Glenn makes a good point, which I think in my time studying was lost on me, which was this idea of a project can have more legs on it in that it doesn't have to just be the 3 months that you're assigned to do something. And I think that I've seen people who've been very fulfilled in their research who've been able to find projects that can clearly extend way beyond the year or two that you're faced with learning it for. That the challenge there is that sometimes that can be quite daunting because you think it can't ever end, but that's actually a positive. I have a very different experience to Glenn, which is that I didn't really come across work like that really made me feel that way. So that's why you could probably answer this question far more concisely than I can, Glenn.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is an element to that. And it does get back, again, I'm assuming that mainly we're going to be speaking to an undergraduate audience for this interview, that probably down the line we'll talk about suggestions about things people should do. And the one thing is, just get your hands on some data, work on a real problem. Classroom learning is a nice building block, sort of, but nothing beats how much you care about an actual problem. And if you, for example, say you don't find yourself really caring about the trace of a matrix or the fact that inverting a covariance matrix is O(n) cubed, and that just doesn't seem particularly interesting to you at the time. It's super duper interesting when you're trying to get your Gaussian processes to run efficiently and fit them efficiently. The thing is like when you're working on a real problem, a lot of these technical things that seem boring when you're learning them in class become extremely interesting because then it has a real application. So that's one bit that I think people should take away, that you will get way more out of your classwork if you find a project you care about. And secondly, while you're trying to find a project that you care about, make sure you choose one that has runway. You shouldn't do one that has that just seems like a throwaway, some other student wrote some numbers down on paper and they want you to do a t-test. That's not a project for you when you're trying to do these things long term. You have to say what's something that people will really care about and that I can take this thing to the intellectual bank, so to say.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Cool.
I'm glad that our batting average is improving. So we'll get better as we go on, as we slowly lose an audience to our long-winded answers. But yeah, I think that is helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And just kind of echo what you two were talking about. I think it's really important to enjoy what you're doing and be passionate about what you're doing. And that's kind of the thing I love about statistics, because you can pair your passion with any statistics, like the minor I was talking about earlier, and really surrounding yourself by people that'll support you in a good work environment is super important early on. So that's something you should look for early in any position or class or anything. Those two indicators.
The amount that you actually care about something is pretty much one-to-one related with whether you're going to be a success in them. It's unfortunate that you see there's a segment of people moving towards data science roles because they are high paying, they have high job security and things like that. They are in vogue. They do hold some amount of social prestige for being someone like, hey, I'm a data scientist, and people are like, oh, that must mean you're smart or something like that. But the fact is, one, it doesn't. But the other bit is that's an unfortunate reason to pursue a career that has this much opportunity, where you can be passionate about it, like Mallory is. You can. Having now known, Richard and I are coming up on our 10-year anniversary, and think about that.
It is.
Yeah. We're coming up on 10 years on that fateful trip up to Manchester. But basically, I did see a change in Richard's passion of his subject when he, for example, said, I've made this quote before. He said, the thing that I enjoyed most about my doctoral work was the statistical modeling and the passion that he puts towards his current job, because he does enjoy being in that game. I didn't work 70, 80 hours per week before I started loving the data science bit. And I'm not saying you have to do that, but consider a job where you wouldn't hate doing that, because that's a better way to spend 40 hours a week if you only want to spend that too. So yeah, you will be way better at your job if you're passionate about it and love it.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Are you ready for the next question? Cool. So my next question, probably just a short one, but what degree do most data scientists have? What do you see most in the workforce?
Richard doesn't see too many data scientists, so I will answer that one. Mainly, I see people with master's degrees and doctorates. However, I also see a number of people with undergraduate degrees who had very rigorous undergraduate degrees. So, for example, if there is somebody who went to a university that made sure that at least, for example, 2 years of their undergraduate degree, they were working on some side problems and they come in with good coding knowledge, just having done an actual thing, those people have a place for them. I actually, Irina Gananova, who's at Texas A&M, I just looked at one of her CGM projects, and she has some undergraduates on it. And those undergraduates will have no problem getting a job. They'll have no problem when they hand their resume to a doctoral program, those supervisors will go after them because they've done something concrete and useful. So I would say the main barrier to this is people know that data scientists get paid very well, but the fact is you have to earn your money, and you need to prove in advance that you have something of use. When you have a doctorate, it means you've probably done something. When you have a master's degree, it means you can probably do something. With an undergraduate degree, you need to be able to make that first step and show that you can do something. So I've some of the best. I've seen good doctoral students. It's about the process and what you're doing during that time. But I've seen people from across the spectrum. Just make sure the main, I guess, to make this concise, the main thing that I've seen all data scientists have is something to show for their time and their work, that they can say, this is what I've done. And those are the people who can get a job.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you.
I'll say one thing that I think's related, and it's entirely my perspective. I think that just speaking to undergraduate degrees, being at university, having an undergraduate degree, that for me is really the absolute minimum of what to do with your time. And I think that, as Glenn pointed to, when you see people who've coming into the field with all sorts of degrees, that the key is that the degree is the foundation, whether it be a PhD. Obviously there are some assumptions you have with a doctoral degree versus undergrad, but I think the approach is generally that baseline expectation is degree, and then data science is good because you have, the application of it is important. You can demonstrate application quite succinctly. So this is probably getting to some of the later questions a bit, but I think it is loosely related to what you say, Glenn.
Yeah, I would just say, for example, so one thing about the degree is, obviously having a technical degree helps. So we're effectively relegating ourselves to a number of subjects: mathematics, statistics, engineering, physics, economics, because it typically has a heavy econometrics component to it. Degrees like that. I'm probably missing a few. Neuroscience typically, for example, has heavy data science and analysis components. And for people who aren't coming from one of those specifically technical backgrounds, there are places for data science for you in a data science position, but you will need to essentially find some way to cover the gap. And I think that's probably something that's going to grow over time, where we're going to get better at pulling in domain experts and giving them the statistics and the data science, rather than trying to teach the domain expert, teach domain aspects to statisticians. So I guess that's one final bit. And then we'll be concise by going on to the next question, unless someone objects.
I'm good.
All right, cool.
I think, yeah. Awesome. So the next question I have is, what is the difference between data analytics and data science?
Yeah. So for this one, the two terms do get squished together quite a bit. People who don't really know the difference we'll use them interchangeably. And for example, just keep in mind, since a lot of people are looking at jobs right now, you might be talking to a hiring manager who does not know the difference between these two things. The difference in their use is convention, and that convention can change from one company to the next. But the typical difference is, I would say, usually it's how much coding is required to do the data analysis that you do. So this is probably too much putting people into boxes, which I really don't like doing because the world doesn't work that way. Like literally, that's not just a truism. Like the world just doesn't work that way. It's too complex. But this sort of the prototypical data analyst might be someone who essentially has strong SQL skills and already has like data displays and things like that. So the data is curated in some way that they can look through it and give people insights that way. It's an extremely useful job. And data scientists actually spend a lot of time doing that, but they also typically have demands on them for statistical modeling, prediction, and all the coding requirements on top of that. So I would say that a lot of the work that data analysts do, a data scientist can end up doing, especially if they're in a smaller group. But yeah, that would be the main thing. And it is a distinction worth making, because actually I was talking to some guy who was looking for some career advice, and he straight up said, like, I like data, I don't like coding. So I don't think that data science is really a good thing for me. And I said, if you don't like coding, you're probably right. Data science is not the thing for you. The data analyst role might be what you like. And getting back to what we said before, you better like your job. Otherwise, you're not going to do a good job at it. So if you don't like coding, I would first of all say, take a crack at getting good at coding. Learn how to focus and do coding well, because it is a skill set that grows on you. But if you really don't like doing that, data science probably isn't for you, but consider the data analyst role as something that might be appropriate.
So there's one thing I want to pick up on. You just said at the end there, Glenn, around, you may not like it, but do it. Coding, I think you were talking about. I think you don't have to be an expert at everything to be either useful because of it or effective because of it. That's the same thing as useful. But you don't have to be an expert at coding to still have it augment a lot of the things you do day to day. And I think sometimes that's lost. Like I think back to when I started doing physics, there was an element of programming, and I was horrible at programming. And one of the challenges as an undergrad was I was around people who were very good at programming from day one. Oh, I thought it was day one, but it may have been that they'd done programming before they even got to university. And I just assumed that, I don't know what I'm doing and everyone else does. And I think that now I find myself programming a lot. It's not always as sophisticated as it could be, or I'm certainly not a software engineer, and I never want to be. But there's an element of, I'm still glad I did it, because it means I'm able to use it to some ends. And going back to my undergrad degree, that's something I would not have expected. Yeah,
no, there definitely is. There's a sort of a terror and uncertainty around coding until you've spent enough time doing it. And unfortunately, the enough time doing it bit is not just like one class, it's years. And yeah, I mean, I work at a software company. I'm the worst coder probably in my company. It doesn't change the fact that I have to do it on a day-to-day basis, and I'm still effective at doing it in my job. Like, they're software engineers. I can't compete with them. I'm a garbage coder compared to them. Like, I'm just no good at all. But I'm pretty solid as a data scientist in my coding ability. So I would say that that's something that it's a fear that you'll have to confront, but it's something worthy of confronting. And, it has gotten easier and easier. Coding languages are becoming easier to understand. You're not having to do everything in C nowadays, unless you're weird and really want to do that. But the coding languages are really coming to us, and the teaching and the hands-on coding experiences, like things on Udemy, you could effectively basically get a undergraduate level of Python coding experience in a $11 course these days. And so, by probably one of the best teachers in the world, so there is that option. But yeah, so I would say that's probably, I guess, so the original question, what's the difference between a data scientist and a data analyst? It's probably how much coding you're going to have to do in order to achieve your job aims.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to give a little bit of advice too. I didn't know any coding coming into my undergraduate studies, so don't let that like scare you. They do a pretty good job of teaching you how to code, but the toughest part of it, like Richard and Glenn have said, is keeping up with it, practicing it. You can learn it in a class, get really good at it for a few months, and then not touch it for a year, and you will forget a lot of the stuff. So it is really like another language. You have to keep on practicing with it, do stuff on the outside, and really get to know it inside and out, outside of the classroom as well. But if you enjoy it, it shouldn't be that hard. So.
So I guess on that point, Mallory, which classes did you initially start coding in?
Yeah, so they taught us our very first semester Python. And then after that, you didn't have to take them like in order, but I took SAS and then R. So yeah, they taught us Python first because they thought it was the most like English. And like the easiest to learn. But I haven't really used it that much since that class. I've used it for a few projects here and there, but yeah.
Yeah. So, because I guess one of the things is one of the places where, like, for example, when you start, if it's taught to you from a general perspective, we're just saying we're going to teach you generally how to code versus we're going to teach you how to use statistical libraries and things like that. That was what I was interested in to see when it is. And
right.
I'd also just say most people, if you feel it's funny that Mallory's trying to tell people, don't worry if you enter undergrad not knowing how to code. You know, when Richard and I were in undergrad, not knowing how to code was like the norm. And like you could go into grad school having taken one coding class. And in that time period, the coding has come to people. You know, my coding requirement in undergrad was Java. And then when we tried to code things up in my math class, we used C. And like, I'm not that old, but like even the sort of the pedagogy around teaching people to code has improved so much. There's not as much reason to be afraid of it anymore.
It's funny. So when I was undergrad, it was C. And then the same course I was on switched to Python, then it switched to R. So it's evolved over the 10 years since, well, more than 10 years since I was there. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I'm actually really appreciative of learning C so that, you know, after I had to learn how to use that, a lot of other things became quite straightforward, relatively speaking. But yeah, it's changed so much. And I think looking back, some of the foundational mathematics is as powerful as anything. Just the ability to write functions and to actually write them from scratch. I mean, I see that as a big gap in how effective somebody is, whether they have to do programming a little bit or a lot. It's just some of the fundamentals around what you can and can't do yourself from scratch. You don't have to do these things from scratch, but sometimes I frequently come across whole myriad of coding styles. And part of the skill is being able to adapt there. And that's still taking me time, but that is something that you just get into the weeds and have to just crack on with.
Yeah, just something like as basic as or non-basic as like bespoke data organization or bespoke data crunching, where you're trying to you have a data set in one way. There's generally not a point and click software that can take the nasty data in the situation where it's actually created from the process that generates it and turns it into a way that's ready for data analysis. And so there's one example where just like there's no point and click software that you can usually have that's going to achieve that. And that might be, again, one of the other differences where like if you're dependent on point and click software, your analysis is limited in that regard. I suspect that I think we do have a coding question. So maybe while you should ask that and we can just sort of tie this one up.
Yeah. So that question is, what is your favorite programming language and why?
My favorite programming language is MATLAB because it's so fast and so easy. However, no one on earth is going to pay me to use MATLAB. So I can't, and I have to do something else. So again, it's one of those like love lost sort of things where, yeah, I really like that language. It's fast, easy. I don't have to think about it. I don't get a fraction of the errors that I do in Python when I just forget how I'm thinking about things. But it's not about me. It's about what needs to be like deployed and things like that. So I code daily in Python, and I like that a lot. I like R, although I haven't done it in quite some time. But yeah, it's mainly Python, and I'm very interested in Julia as a potential language that's coming up. And I just also say one of the main things is, it's never really a versus thing, because one, you generally don't get to choose what legacy, what sort of technical legacy you're stepping into. So if you have a company where everyone is using R or everyone is using I don't know, Rust, it's like, well, that's the order of the day, and so you might not have that, but I think like Python is generally the safest bet for people these days. But I have no doubt that I will have to learn more languages over the course of my lifetime, assuming I live to a reasonable age.
I mean, so on my side, I think, it's funny because my like or dislike of a program language is confounded with when I learned it, right? So I first had to really delve into programming a lot during my doctorate, and that was with MATLAB. I was in an engineering department, so we use MATLAB, and I really disliked it because I was very bad. I look back at I don't look back at the code anymore, but when I would have to, for some reason, it's painful to look at. And I just think, I don't want to use MATLAB again. But at the same time, it does the job. And I think generally, languages, they do the job they're supposed to do. And I don't really have a preference. I have to use R a lot, and it's fine. It works for me. There was a short time when I had to learn how to use Python, and that was fun. But it was partly fun because of the problems I was attacking, and they were physics problem, and I like physics. So the language is not a favorite. I don't really have favorites of languages.
Yeah. So Mallory, I guess you're probably the person who's worked on SAS most recently. So I would say as far as like actual language diversity, you have something to teach us. But what's your read on these things these days? Like what are people, is it still like the divide between academic engineers use MATLAB, statisticians use R, Python just wriggles around and does whatever it wants to, and then SAS is for people based in Cary, North Carolina?
I think that is pretty accurate. But I think at least I have an internship at SAS, so we do use it quite a lot there. And I know the certification exam for SAS, if you're able to take that, is something that employers look for a lot. But yeah, I think as a student, kind of like differentiating between the languages for me, it kind of depends on like the problem I'm tackling. So if I need to like read in a data set, I feel most comfortable doing that with SAS. Like if it's like a really messy data set and I have no idea where to begin, I'd normally go to SAS because I feel the most comfortable with that. And then if I need to like make graphs, I really like R to do that. I think it's the easiest and the most intuitive to me, which I've met a lot of people that don't think that, but that's just my opinion. I would do R for graphs, and then Python, I would do like data frame manipulation, like merging data frames and stuff like that. I feel most confident using Python with that. So it's kind of weird. I feel like as I go further, I need to like feel comfortable doing all of those in one language. But as a student, you're kind of learning all of these at the same time and figuring out what part of each language you like, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I don't think your approach is that wrong. Like at least if you know what you prefer, at the very least you can figure out if you ultimately do have to choose a smaller subset of those languages, how to get that experience that you want in the other language. And you can even, since you do know how to code, you can create functionality that helps you actually achieve that faster. So one of the nice things about coding is that you can actually build your own tools. so you don't have to go through some of those steps before. I would also very quickly point out, Mallory, what is the name of the hall in which you take most of your classes?
SAS Hall.
It is called SAS Hall. SAS Hall at NC State. So obviously NC State is the NC State Statistics Department is very intertwined with SAS. And obviously SAS is a fundamental data analysis. You could even call it data analysis paradigm for a large part of the biopharmaceutical industry. So yeah, I mean it's something that's there. I don't think it's really there to change. Very quickly, when you're talking about SAS, Mallory, are you talking about like JUMP, or are you talking about baseline SAS? Or
yeah, so in school they teach us base SAS, but through my internship I've used a little bit of JUMP, but that's not into our curriculum yet. A lot of students I've come across don't know JUMP. We know of it, but we haven't learned it. So
all right, cool, sweet. Yeah, I think that gets to it. Where basically you're gonna have to learn multiple languages. I will second Richard. As you might have heard, I did say how much I love working in MATLAB, although I realize I can't do it because it can't really be deployed easily by other people who aren't using it. But I also hated MATLAB in my first experience with it. Like I straight up hated it for probably a good 6 months. And then when I transitioned back to MATLAB from R, I also wasn't too big of a fan of it. But again, it's something where once you can get over the actual emotional terror of not knowing how to code and being expected to, and you're going to fail class if you don't learn this thing, when you take that out of it, you can actually enjoy the process a bit more. So I think that is something. But yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate you giving us some up-to-date feedback on what's going on.
Yeah, of course. All right, are we ready for the next question?
I think so.
Cool. So the next thing I was wondering is, how do you all think that data science jobs will change in the future? In like the next 10 years, next 30 years? What do you think it'll look like?
Richard, I've sort of nabbed the first strike at the last few questions. Do you want to try this one?
I can have a crack. This is going to be wild speculation. But I think it depends on the industry you're applying it in. I think the industry is going to drive how they utilize data scientists. And insofar as whether, because I was having a discussion with somebody not too long ago about this. In some fields, modeling and simulation and analysis really, really influence decisions, right? They really do matter. And as a result, of course, data scientists are heavily relied on. But in some cases, they don't, right? The people who are making decisions don't use data in the same way. So it's hard for me to give concrete examples of what these fields are. And I think that just comes down to looking into the field. But I think the first thing to look at is, what field are you looking to apply this data science in? And I think that will dictate where jobs are going. And there may be something where you will have departments of data scientists who influence decisions, or there'll be fields where you have a data scientist because it's like, oh, great, we got a data scientist, we're validated, and they're not really used in the way that I think they're most effective. So, one thing, I think, Glenn, you can probably speak to this, but when I look at something like patient monitoring, I think that's changed in the last 30 years with the quality of data you've got. And if you've got good quality data, you do see data scientists being useful. And there are some fields in 10 years where that is going to change or is currently changing. I think I'm going to stop there because, I'm reaching the edge of my...
No, I think you've hit on some very good points where, and I'll take what Richard said and just rephrase it, because that's how we just draw this thing out. But basically, I think there are going to be some binary changes. One, there are going to be specific fields, as Richard said, who did not have data science before, and their change is going to be, let's just say the 10-year change, because no one knows what's going to happen in 30 years. Or if our species will even exist. Maybe we'll just wipe ourselves out with AI, nukes with Google Go, whatever, driving them around. But, we're going to basically have specific fields that go from 0 to 1, where they're not going to have nothing really in there, and they're going to have something. we're also going to have people who do currently use data scientists learning how to actually use data scientists. Most companies don't. It's sort of they're feeling their way through it. You'll see this where companies will say, "There's all these data science needs. Let's grab an entire team of data scientists. We'll get 10 of them. We get as many as we can, and they'll do stuff." And then they realize, wait, I don't even know how to manage or use one data scientist. What am I doing with 10? And now these people are effectively taking up like millions of dollars of budget. And so there is going to be a pushback, and people are going to have to take a hard look, like, how can I actually manage these people? Software engineering, there are processes that are worked out where there are at least theories and belief systems. People talk about like waterfall and agile. Like there's an actual process that they manage them and get things done. Data science doesn't have that yet. So there are two binaries right there. On that note, some more specific things, I think that probably we're going to see software engineers pick up a lot more data analysis skills, where I think it's a major thing where data scientists aren't software engineers. Software engineers aren't data scientists. And there's going to be a bit where one of the reasons why data scientists are useful is because they have some of the software engineering skills that transition from a statistician to a software engineer. But we're going to see software engineers coming the other way, essentially still retaining those fundamental software engineering skills, but being a little bit better at data analysis. Other quick things that I'll rattle off, as I've talked about before, look at places where data is digitizing. One, there's going to be enough work there to keep, when data is digitizing, there's going to be a lot of data. Where there's a lot of data, you can keep a person employed because they're going to be busy. And also where there's a lot of data, it means that there's an economic process, there's an economic value to that data, and therefore this data scientist warrants their salary. So I think there's a few things like that. But yeah, I think it's going to be switching a few binaries, and then who knows what's going to happen in 30 years. Oh, one more thing. Back to the data and analyst versus data scientist role. I think that some enterprising, ingenious people will find more ways such that a lot of the mundane data scientist tasks, like data wrangling, data viewing, things like that, won't be as manual as they were before. It's just, if you have people making 6-figure salaries and beyond that, there's no reason why you want them spending, 1/6 or 1/2 of their time just trying to arrange data. Like that's just a software product that needs to be out there, and it's going to be worth a lot of money. So I think that some more enterprise solutions like that, the current enterprise solutions for those things, will ramp up because the economic value of them is so high.
I think on that point, just in where you see standardization, that might be a big part of where that's coming from. As soon as you start standardizing things, you can automate the things as well. And some fields are further along the path than others on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are really good points. Cool. Are we ready for the next question?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. So this one is, how big was the biggest data set that you've ever worked with? And how long did it take to process and analyze it and everything?
I'll be quick here. Mine are typically small on the scale of, megabytes or gigabytes. They're 100 megabytes, let's say. And took me a couple of weeks, maybe a week each time to make something that I analyze. A lot of my work is actually modeling data and simulating from it rather than doing a huge amount of wrangling. And it's usually quite narrow. But it's like clinical trial data is already highly standardized. So it is efficient to do these processes, which is the real reason why it's not very long and they're not too big. Because I'm typically interested in a very specific bit of the data.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I would just very quickly, because people might be trying to sort of work out in their heads, like, wait, I just heard Richard say he's only talking something on the order of like tens of megabytes, and yet it's taking a large computational time. One thing that's important to distinguish is that basically there's a difference between the size of sort of the baseline data, the initial data, and the computational challenge of the analysis that you're doing. So, just like we want to distinguish between, there's difference between the statistical model you use, for example, linear regression. and the inference method that you use to fit that model. Just to keep a simple example, you could use maximum likelihood estimation, and that has an analytical solution. You use gradient descent, which would bring you to a maximum likelihood, or you could, for example, integrate over the parameter space. And each one of these that I described, the model is staying the same, the data is staying the same, but the actual computational process is different from each of these. And so there is a bit here where it's not just about, exactly how many gigabytes your data is taking up. It's more about the entire structure. And so, Richard, you can take a small amount of data, and if you're running a very large, complex simulation, essentially he's generating more data and more computational requirements in his own analysis than the actual original data set was to begin with. And so I think that might be something that people need to parse through. I will give Richard, is that an acceptable?
There's only one other thing that may be different for different tasks in data science. So for me, the data sets are small and, they're precious. So you can't throw things out without some sort of strongly justified reason. So whilst there's not much information, every single piece is precious. So there's a lot of time and effort invested into understanding that data well, rather than, say, ripping some data off the internet where you really don't care about a lot of it. You're just looking for particular things inside it. So I think because of the problems I look at, the way I use the data, big or small, is probably different to others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say I think that's pretty fair. Just to answer your question so I don't dodge it, the biggest data sets that I've worked with are something on, and actually this is going to be a boring answer too, but it's no more than on the sort of tens and hundreds of gigs. But what's boring about my answer is that the analysis that I used was there's actually a term called, I think, embarrassingly parallelizable. And so basically the actual analysis that I was performing was so freaking parallelizable that it was actually a very straightforward computational problem. So it didn't require much more than me just bringing up a few threads on a remote computer and just letting it all run in process, and just came back the next morning and it was done. And so that's going to be a lot different than, for example, someone who's working, for example, in deep learning, where not only are you going to have a huge amount of data, but it's a computationally expensive fitting process as well. So that's that. What about you, Mallory? What are your biggest data sets?
Yeah, at school, they're all fairly small and pretty easy to read in. But through my internship, I've worked with a lot of genetic data that can get pretty big because the genomes are quite big. So I'm working with
yes,
one
they
right
are.
now. Yeah, that's actually just downloaded it. Let me check. But it's...
And this is the thing here, to buy Mallory a minute, the small data problem is a thing. I know people like to talk about big data a lot, but how to actually deal with small data sets is an extremely important issue. And especially like when you wonder why, for example, people are so interested in Bayesian statistics, a lot of that issue is in Bayesian nonparametrics, is that they are trying to deal intelligently with changing sizes of data sets. And if you paid a lot of money to get 2 sample points, you're going to want to use those 2 sample points. And so there it is. So Mallory, what's your answer?
It's 4 million kilobytes.
4 million kilobytes.
Okay. 4 gigabytes.
Yep.
Yeah. So it takes like 10 minutes to download on my computer.
That's fair enough.
But yeah.
Yeah, so it does come to something. For example, like even genomic data. If you are essentially reading for SNPs and things like that, the segment, you can have a massive data set, but if you're only looking at a certain segment of it, obviously that bit breaks down. It does ultimately come down to what you're trying to do with the data, and so I would say that's probably that's one of the things where it's not just like you have this giant engine on your car. It's what you're actually trying to do with that car that actually matters. So,
just to add one more piece on my work, the data sets aren't big, but because the modeling, you can have somebody who's very good at modeling and somebody who's not so good at modeling, and it can be orders of magnitude different in time modeling. Because I can work on models where I run 100 models or more to get to something that describes data well and it is fit for purpose and can be used. And that process is highly variable. A lot of that is experience and also just good planning and understanding the scope of your problem. And that's nothing to do with the size of the data set. That's usually, for me at least, the nature of in my case, the drug, let's say, and what properties it does and doesn't have. So data set's one thing, but processing and analysis is another, and it's very, very different depending on sometimes just the person, quite frankly.
Yeah. Just I guess maybe to follow up on that just very quickly, and to keep this concise, I'll pop some links in the video description. But basically, even when I say that, there's a substantial amount of my work that has gone around dealing with computational problems. So, for example, Richard, my Bayesian optimization work, it was around reducing the computational burden. So not trying to use brute force computation to resolve certain problems, certain model fitting problems. And so by choosing an intelligent algorithm to actually fit my models, I could get farther. And some similar stuff with like state space modeling of time series. There are certain mathematical processes that you can do to go faster. Yeah. So I guess just to follow up on that bit, just because there's a lot of work that people do to avoid those computational burdens, even if it doesn't seem like they're working with large data sets. The Gaussian process modeling is a typical example, or essentially, just for those who aren't familiar, it's a very popular Bayesian non-parametric regression method. However, the fitting in the model, which involves the inversion of a covariance matrix multiple times, grows cubically with the size of the data set. So essentially, you can have a small number of observations, but the computational burden on that is quite large. And people there's a huge amount of research into how to avoid that, and how to better essentially fit your model without suffering the computational consequences. Cool. All right. Next question. I think awesome. I beat that one pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So these next three questions I have are kind of like more about like advice and stuff that undergrad should be doing to prepare for a data science role. So the first one, I know we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but what are some skills that you think students should be practicing to help them ease the transition into a data science role upon graduation?
Yeah, I'll start that with I would say honestly, I'm not meaning to be a sycophant or anything, but like Mallory is a pretty good example of some good practices that an undergraduate can do. For just a simple thing like, obviously your supervisor reached out to see if you wanted to do this Q&A. And you didn't say, oh, let me think, let me consider my options. You're like, yeah, let's do it. And you made it super easy. And now effectively you went from you're an undergraduate, and pretty shortly a large number of people in the American Statistical Association are actually going to know who you are. And so just like that basic can-do attitude can really just like push you farther. So I would say like most things there's not a huge risk to just trying certain things and just being like easy about it and just like getting stuff done. That is something. On that note, be someone who gets stuff done. Another thing, Mallory, you talked about, like you're working several, like you have a job, you have an internship in data science. That's massive. Like, first of all, those things weren't around quite as much when I was an undergrad, and they weren't as well defined, and it wasn't quite so straightforward to get them. But like, I wouldn't have even known where to look for them. But that is something where like you're actually doing stuff, and that's useful. So be someone who's actually doing stuff. I'll think of some others, Richard. I'll pile on top of you once you give some advice as well. But those are two things I would just say, like that general can-do attitude. Just start doing things and try to do them in data science.
Yeah, I guess trying to keep it concise. I've had a poor track record this afternoon. But I think a really key skill is communication. We've touched on this with the writing aspect, but also, speaking. And I think there's a level of sort of that a lot of what limit people is how well they can communicate their ideas. Quite frankly, you can sit there by yourself or with a group of people who do what you do and have some fantastic work that's lost to society because no one can explain it concisely. I mean, this is ironic, actually, but certainly just being able to condense ideas, no matter how complicated or simple they seem to you, into something that somebody who doesn't do what you do can understand. Being good at that, practicing that, talking to people about that, that transfers outside of data science. And it's very easy to have people become disinterested very quickly if you can't do that, no matter what work you've done before then. So that for me is a huge skill. And the reason I bring that up is because I have seen in the time I've worked in my field that people are often looking for you to do something, and they either know what they want you to do, they don't know what you want to do, they are interested, or they're often not interested. You are there to help them do something, and once you've done it, thank you very much. Sometimes you do have collaborations, and I think how you communicate with those different groups of people is different. And being aware of that and being able to do it is important. How you do that as an undergrad, part of it is doing what you're doing, which is you go and work in fields where you can to see what that looks like. So
it also means that you have something to actually say. I think that's one of the bits. So it's not just about communicating, but the fact is, like, Mallory, you've actually done something. If you hadn't done something, it would be less interesting to talk to you. So it's anyone can have an opinion. Not everyone gets to have a qualified opinion. And so I would just say for that, the fact that you are working in a scientific field, and I realize that, like, given the nature of the Q&A, we didn't get to go into what you work on as much. But there is a difference between someone who's actually done something. If they've done something, they have something interesting to talk about. If they can say it and describe it and communicate it efficiently, all the better. But yeah, I would just say first work on having done something that's worth talking about, and then learn how to communicate it well. And there's a big difference between, the conversational methods, that we're having right now. And if you told Richard and I to put this to pen and paper, we could have probably boiled down all of our points to maybe a page or two of text. So like, depending on the mode, we would up our game when it came to communication efficiency.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think so. One of the skills I think of that has helped me in my role, and this may change a bit depending on what role you're looking at, is there are some scientific concepts. And I think, Glenn, you were speaking a little bit about some of the nuances around computational science that are now actually important for some of the work you do. Being able to see when that might be important later down the line is a skill you can get by doing them, really. Looking into details when you find something interesting. This is certainly turning into a rambling answer, but what it can be boiled down to is if you find something interesting, do investigate it. One of the things that is sometimes takes more time than you think is at university, you do certainly learn how you work, and you try and that what you find, well, what I found at least, is that you learn what is efficient and what's not efficient as a learning skill, right? But that also transfers into a working skill when you start in a workplace. So doing some work gives you opportunities to say, listen, how should I interact in these environments effectively? And that again is just that's begun by getting on with some work somewhere. But those are the sort of skills which are really going to help make
yeah,
it.
I mean, just nothing beats just doing stuff. Like, you just do stuff. That's why they have the job. Your job is to do stuff. It's to do stuff with science and data, and you should just do stuff. And as long as you're making progress, you'll get better at it. Actually, I'm thinking now, it's like maybe we should bring Mallory back on, and she can present her work, the work from your internship, and we will talk about that. And like, we'll just give you feedback and things like that. I think that'd be fun. Like, man, it's like, I was like, God, this never ends. But yeah, I think something like that would be fun.
Yeah.
And we could just, cool. And look, she just said yes right away. She didn't have to be like, you have no idea how many people like, hey, do you want to like come and present your work? And they have to like really think about it. It's like, let me figure out all the traps. It's not like some Dungeons and Dragons thing where like there's a trap behind every little card that I pull up. Yeah, massive can-do attitude here. And I think that's,
I guess there's one important thing here is that, you have to have a level of confidence in what you're doing before you're able to say yes to things like that, right? And some people will be there, some people won't be there. So, there is a spectrum here, but I think ultimately, there's a level of openness and flexibility that is a good thing to have. And how you get there, I think, is, being confident in what you're doing, which means paying attention to it at the first step, and then you can build into actually saying, I would like to talk about my work because I think it's probably useful, rather than I don't really know what I'm doing, so I don't want to talk about. So they're very different circumstances that exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even from a student standpoint, like, if you aren't feeling confident about what you've done, like, try to pinpoint things that you are confident about. Like, even if you read in a data set and you're really proud of it, you can describe that process to someone. You can practice communicating how you did it in the process, and that'll help you become a better data scientist. And then as you get better at it, you might do a model, you might make a graph or something. And so you just kind of build on that skill. It's okay if you don't know everything right now. No one's really expecting you to know everything.
I think, and that's an incredibly good point, because what is probably lost is how just saying, I've done this, what do you think? People will give constructive feedback.
Right.
Immediately, and it will help everything get better. And it's amazing how many people would say, interesting, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And, it just is a positive feedback loop,
right,
wherever you begin.
So just like concretely, because I'm a concrete person, like, Melanie, what are you currently most proud? Like, what is your proudest sort of data science achievement? And then I'm going to obviously follow up with the more difficult one after that.
That's a good question. I'd probably say the stuff that I'm doing at my internship, because I feel like it's something that is way out of the scope of like what I learned in class. And I really worked hard on it over the past year. And it's kind of cool because I'm working on coronavirus stuff. So it's like really applicable right now, which I think is awesome. Like we were talking about, it's really useful. And the people that I'm working on with it are amazing. I've learned so much from them, even though it's all been virtual, but it's just been a really great project that is something so much bigger than myself. So I think it's really cool to be a part of that.
Cool. And to follow, I think it is important that you're developing a strong sense of meaning from your work, because otherwise it's hard to get out of bed in the morning. But right. And now here's the weird question. Like, what are you least confident about right now? Because I have a general guess what most undergraduates are least confident about. What are you least confident about right now in your data science skills? Like what are you not wanting to show the world?
Yeah. I feel pretty confident with like reading in data, manipulating it, getting it into a form I want, and like visualizing it. And then doing simple models on data I feel comfortable with. But there's like a point where like I definitely split from the professionals in the kind of models that I can create. So that's probably the thing that I'm like struggling with the most. Like, I can make a pretty good linear model, multiple linear regression model, but that's about it using coding. And so we've been trying to do a mixed model, which I've had to learn a lot and read a lot about to get that done. So I don't know if it's just me not being able to understand it or something that like statistics students aren't taught enough in school, but I think, yeah, that's my weak spot.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because basically every statistician, no matter where they are, basically feels like a complete noob at the moment they're working on a model that they don't understand or that they need to learn something new. And it's, you add to that the fact that you know that there's someone else out there who does know that model and they're going to correct you and you're going to feel dumb. And like, and there's no way around that. And so I would just say like, you're actually at a very advanced stage, which means like you're at the stage of just like high levels of doubt and criticism towards your own work. So yeah, you're going to be learning a lot more, but the your knowledge base will keep increasing. The feeling that you feel about that, that's not going away. Like that will be there. Like you will be 5 years out of your doctorate and you will still be getting that feeling when it comes to certain things.
Yeah.
So yeah, like welcome.
Thanks. Yeah. I like, as much as I don't like the feeling, it's kind of motivating me to like learn more about it because I want it to go away, you know? So it's kind of like hopeful, but yeah, it's good to know it'll stick around.
Somebody who I respect a great deal said to me, one of the skills that's really important is the ability to have comfort being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think that is a lot of what this comes down to. Once you've really understood some specific techniques, as soon as you move to something you don't understand, the gap seems massive. It seems huge. But at the same time, there's a lot of experience before that means that the process is simpler, or there are other things that are good to make the transition easier. And it's really fun.
Yeah, it is. It is a lot of fun. And yeah, I guess maybe just on to close that out, well, I guess the nice thing is that now that we know that both of you are coming back at some point in time, that we can. What we should do is we should track Mallory's career. Like we should just like every project that you do, we just do a little quick update. Just keep tracking things. But I think this is something that I think gets lost. That people, because effectively, like if you are going to be looking for advice, you are going to be looking for the people who already have their PhD. Who if you have to see the people, and the people up on stage talking are the ones who are professors and postdocs, or they have their own podcasts and things like that. And like you're essentially only seeing people at the more advanced stages, and the stage that you're at is essentially undercovered. But it doesn't mean that you're actually more of like the majority case. Like you're especially the majority case because everyone has gone through your trajectory. It's like Order of the Phoenix, where it's like, oh, the great wizards, they were once students like us. So yeah, I think just keep in mind you are the majority case, and people have gone through it and come out on the other side very successful. So be comfortable feeling uncomfortable on those things. That's how you move ahead. Cool.
Yeah. I know, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Kind of the point you mentioned earlier about like how a lot of people that we're going to be like looking up to and working with, our professors are all like, they've been doing this forever. I know that when I did get to my internship, I had quite a bit of imposter syndrome. I was like, why am I here? Like, I don't know anything compared to everyone here. And like, it was a shock at the beginning. And I feel like everyone that's going to go into the workplace after school, it's very different than school. And you're going to feel like that at the beginning, but that's okay. Because what I did to kind of help that is I reached out to other interns and I like talked to them, and we were all kind of feeling the same thing. And then with time, it got better. We started to learn more. We got used to everything. But yeah, just kind of as Glenn mentioned earlier, you're not alone. We are the majority. And just kind of find someone that you can talk to and relate to about that if that's starting to happen to you.
So there are two things I want to mention that are related to that. One is that everybody brings something
Right.
I mean, for example, when somebody who is new to a field or to a role is just beginning, there's a lot of kind of enthusiasm that helps often invigorate anybody, quite frankly. And it's not just about, in this case, knowing how to run complicated models. It's also about having different perspectives, which I think are powerful at any level for anybody who's joining something new or seeing something for the first time. And there's a lot of people who do look for that as well, I think. And the other thing I would say is, and you kind of touched on this a bit just recently, Mallory, we were talking about other people to interact with. I know it's kind of jumping ahead to another question, but I think it's relevant here, which is this idea, as an undergrad at least, and some people fall into this, some people don't. But the concept of having some kind of mentor or mentorship is incredibly useful, because it means you're not so surprised by certain things when they do ultimately arrive. And I think that's something that is sometimes, it's luck later down the line, whether that happened or not. I mean, I'm thinking about myself here that, when I was an undergrad, there was, one particular person in the department who, I still interact with now, where it was just a fortunate set of interactions where I was able to talk to them about certain things with my career and learning that were helpful to me. But if I was to look back and say, well, were there others? There were probably others too that I just missed along the way because it was just something that was not near the front of my mind. And the same goes for being in a workplace, be them fellow interns or people who have been working in the environment for a while, to talk to and reach out about and understand things about. And they may have nothing to do with data science. They probably won't have anything to do with data science, actually. So yeah, that I have certainly run off into an alley with that. But
well, I think actually one of the big bits that you said was everyone has something to contribute, and maybe the way to maybe what we should sign off on is quickly saying, what is it that an undergraduate has? What advantage do they have? Because obviously it's not an experience advantage. It's in many ways, it's not a volume of knowledge advantage. However, they do have an angle of knowledge advantage. So like they do come with a different perspective. Graduates also come with time and energy. They aren't the time restraints for someone who's in their early 20s versus someone who's in their early 30s is quite different. And so you have time, you have energy, you have a different angle. And also you are equipped with things like the fact that you do have coding experience that many of people 10 years older than you weren't picking up until they were already in grad school. So essentially your start line was moved up as people tried to sort of better guess what you need to prepare you for your journey. But I would say do not underestimate the fact that you guys have a ton of energy. You have the time to like enact your goals and really work towards them. So I'm quite envious of that.
There's two things I want to add to that. One is, it is the opportunity to be an open book, right? To be someone where, I haven't got stuck in certain ways after 15 years of doing something, for example. So there's a lot of value there. And the other one, which is escaping me for the moment.
Was it brain plasticity, that they actually have brain plasticity that we don't?
What was
Up till age 25, use it while you can.
Oh, don't say that, Glenn. That's long since gone for me. Oh, I had one more. So what did I just say? I said open book.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, the crux. I will try and think about
I'm not going to edit this out. Like, I'm just going to literally let you just, this bit of you just suffering. Yeah, I'm not editing that out.
I've got it. Thank you. Phew. The fields, we've talked about this a bit. Fields change.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Conventions change. Somebody doing the same degree 15 years later, there are fresh perspectives that come along. And that is that can really change a group or a company. Because, one of the things I found quickly going into my field is that there aren't as many opportunities to continue learning a variety of things. Like, you specialize ultimately. So before you specialize, there's lots of things you can amass, whether or not you know them in great detail, which can then grow into something else, but they can be a different perspective. And I think sometimes that is incredibly useful. Maybe not immediately, maybe there's a bit of a delay, but it's something which is certainly valuable for undergrads to bring.
Yeah, that's a good point. And kind of like viewing it from the undergrad perspective, like I've seen my coworkers like want to do things a different way. And I've seen their different perspectives too. So it's kind of neat to like have these age gaps between like the workplace, because you really get people that have gone through school differently and done things differently for years. So it's kind of cool to see like what's the best way to work. So for sure.
Yeah. So I guess, on that, I think that Mallory, you are in a very good place to have an enjoyable career. We will be tracking that now very diligently on an episode by episode basis. And I guess this isn't goodbye, because we're going to be seeing each other at some point in the future. So, but yeah, I think that undergraduates are in an excellent position to have a very fulfilling career. I hope that they choose something that they have a passion about, that's useful, and you put those two together, and that's what matters. So I think undergraduates, they're in, there's some bits about their situation that makes it uncomfortable, but I can't think of too many people who would be more than happy to basically be able to trade the positions and go back and have all that potential again and know where to go with it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right, cool. Well, Mallory, Richard, thanks so much for your time, and we'll talk to you both soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Mallory.
Hey guys, it's Glenn. Thanks for your time today. I hope you liked today's episode. If you did, please consider smashing that like button. It's the single, simplest, fastest way to make sure that YouTube shows this video to more people. If you really want to go crazy, consider subscribing or going to our website and joining the mail list. If you want to go totally crazy beyond that, forward this to a friend or colleague who you think might enjoy this too. We're a small channel and every bit helps. Our next episode will be coming out next week, so in the meantime, feel free to look around the channel and see other videos that might be of interest. As a quick disclaimer, the views expressed on the show do not represent anything other than the people saying those words, views, etc. like that. It doesn't mean anything about their employers or their employers' views or some thing about their employers or their neighbor's cat or anyone else not saying the words. And in fact, given that people tend to change their views when they're thoughtful enough, it might not even represent the views of the speaker by the time you're hearing the episode. So definitely come back and see if they've changed their views at a later date. They also don't represent the views of our sponsors. Thank you to our sponsors. You can check them out on our website.